In the late 1960s, the University of Puerto Rico was the center of protest against U.S. militarization in college campuses. These tensions stemmed from the U.S. taking control of the island since the Spanish-American War of 1898 and creating policies that led to the establishment of the Commonwealth in 1952. There is a small segment of the population who resents said policies, such as the militarization of the island and the eligibility of the Selected Service Act, because they felt they had no voice in government. This eligibility was the result of the Passage-Jones Act in 1917, which made Puerto Ricans U.S. citizens. Opposition to the militarization of the island has found its cradle in the University of Puerto Rico, founded in the 1900s, where many pro-independence groups have spread their message for decades. During the 1960s, conflict erupted in the UPR due to the military presence of Reserve Officer Training Corps, ROTC, on campus, resulting in the deaths of many. To quell the conflict, a compromise was reached, establishing a turning point in the history of the university. In the 1960s and early 70s, conflict erupted between the ROTC and La Federación Universitaria Pro Independencia, or FUPI, over the military presence on campus. For them, the main source of conflict was the fight against U.S. colonialism, militarism, and Vietnam War.
No es un problema militar aislado, no es un asunto circunstancial desvinculado de lo demás. No, está vinculado a la problemática política de fondo que hace que el país se vea involuntariamente vinculado con un conflicto armado con el cual no tiene nada que ver.
On the opposite side stood the ROTC, whose official purpose was to train cadets into well-educated, quality officers. They believed they had the right to receive an education in preparation for the militia.
The ROTC was legal to be in the university, so we had a right to be there as students.
Student opposition to ROTC presence on campus increased and turned violent during the 60s. The protests mirrored the nationwide struggle against the Vietnam War and the draft, which many considered to be fruitless because they believed that it wasn't their fight.
Interesante consignar que en ese mismo momento en Estados Unidos hay grandísimas manifestaciones contra la guerra de Vietnam, incluyendo aplicación de violencia contra estudiantes universitarios de la misma manera que ocurrió en la UPR. Menciona el caso de la Universidad de Kent, en Ohio, donde la Guardia Nacional asesinó a 5 estudiantes universitarios en pleno campus universitario.
While protests in the United States promoted peace, in Puerto Rico they differed. Many pro-independence groups and the FUPI in Puerto Rico identified with the Vietnamese struggle because of their similar fight to be free from American influence. In 1967, violence on campus led to a death of a bystander. The conflict continued and was exacerbated in September 1969 with the arrest of Edwin Feliciano Grafals, who was taken into custody for refusing to join the military after being drafted. As a result, protests escalated and turned violent, leading to partial burning of the ROTC building with losses surpassing $30,000.
And the attack began big time. I mean, they tried to burn the building down, and we were inside.
Concerns over increasing violence led to Civil Rights Commission in October 1969 to pass a resolution endorsing authorities and university groups to protect everyone's right to protest by peaceful means and condemning the use of violence regardless of political ideology. Nevertheless, these efforts were unsuccessful since tensions continued. This protest on March 4, 1970, culminated in the death of a 21-year-old student named Antonia Martinez, who was killed by a police officer at the protest, allegedly shooting her after she yelled at the officers. The greatest outrage for the people at the time was that the officer who shot her was acquitted, facing no charges for his actions. The violence continued long after her death. On March 11, 1971, riots erupted when the ROTC organized their own protests for their right to be in the university.
And it started calm, I mean, no problem. When we got to the front of the university, a fupista threw a piece of wood at my father. And my father grabbed a piece of wood and sent it back, and that was it. I mean, that started everything.
From this incident, a police officer, the chief of the riot police, and cadet Jacinto Gutierrez were killed in the midst of the continued protests. As a result of this incident, the president of the university, Jaime Benitez, took actions.
Diversas medidas contra dirigentes y militantes. Hubo suspensiones sumarias contra estudiantes. Hubo medidas represivas como la entrada de la policía. En mi caso particular, por ejemplo, yo fui objeto de una suspensión sumaria tras los sucesos del 11 de marzo del año 71.
Benitez emphasizes that the university's main goal was to serve as a center of study, not to promote political agendas. Due to the continuous violence, the ROTC and pro-independence groups in the university were brought to a compromise by the administrative authorities and the government. Before the decision was made, the university carried out a referendum in 1970 to decide what would happen to the ROTC presence in the university. In the referendum, 80% of the student body voted for the removal of the ROTC from campus. This, along with the deaths that occurred on campus, influenced the final decision. The university, the governor of Puerto Rico, and the Department of Defense decided to relocate the ROTC building to a facility off campus in 1971.
Que tienen que llegarse a situaciones extremas como esta para que finalmente entonces se mueve el edificio del ROTC fuera del recinto.
Authorities felt this compromise would satisfy both sides. For the Fupistas, the ROTC members were stripped of their visibility on campus. For the ROTC, their program was allowed to remain active in the university but with limitations. Aside from being removed from the main grounds, the cadets would no longer be allowed to wear their uniforms on campus. The protests in the UPR had a profound effect on the Institute's history, and the aftershocks of it are still being experienced. The compromises made during 1971 have lasted all the way to today. Unfortunately, the conflict has not ended entirely. The Fupistas have continued their political activism since then. Protests against the ROTC have continued in isolated incidents and on a smaller scale. For instance, in 2014, a student in uniform inside campus was harassed by the Fupi members and had to be escorted outside the campus. Nevertheless, major protests on campus nowadays are more related to economic and educational issues rather than the ROTC's presence in the university. For instance, in 2017, students protested over a proposed sharp increase in tuition costs by the Fiscal Control Board, responsible for helping the Puerto Rican government balance its budget, which is in a debt of $70 billion. The students feel that the increase in tuition costs and their cuts to their academic programs will have a detrimental effect to the university's services, ultimately destroying the university. In the long run, pro-independence groups benefited more so than the ROTC members, due to the ROTC being cast into obscurity. The ROTC program, while still relevant in the UPR, does not have the same influence or presence as it once did.
La consecuencia neta de esto va a ser que las siguientes generaciones universitarias después del año 71 no van a experimentar la presencia militar dentro del recinto.
The conflict and its outcome ultimately had a negative impact on the enrollment of the ROTC, having dropped by about 66% from 1967 to 1971. Today, the university's ROTC program consists of 146 cadets. This is an 81% drop from 1967. One may infer that the protest and removal of the ROTC from campus affected their enrollment in the long run. Consequently, both groups do not feel completely satisfied. The ROTC feel like they have been denied the right to be who they are.
I couldn't be satisfied. There's no way I could be satisfied with that. There was a lot of sweat and tears protecting that building. It wasn't just a building, you know. A building is cement and blocks. It's thoughts, it's personality, it's character. We put in everything we could put into it. Gutierrez put in his life.
On the other hand, pro-independence groups do not view this compromise as a total victory, for they still believe that the government and administration in the university are intolerant to the current needs of student population. Finally, the conflict at the UPR during the late 60s and early 70s had a profound effect on the institution. The protest can be seen as a breaking point of a long struggle against U.S. presence by pro-independence groups. This conflict, while tragic, brought to light many dividing political issues. Compromise, on the other hand, brought changes for the future of ROTC and their role in university life. By challenging government policies in the UPR, student activism demonstrated the underlying power of resistance and solidarity by active citizens who wanted their voices to be heard. Unfortunately, lives were lost in the process, revealing once again that mutual understanding and tolerance play a vital role in averting years of needless struggle and suffering.
En estos tiempos de parodias ya no cesan